Afraid to have a serious conversation with your spouse because it always seems to boil over into a fight? Having a disagreement, a conflict is okay. It's part of being in an intimate relationship. But fighting is another story. I'm going to share with you my 4-step conflict resolution recipe so that you can resolve conflicts before they boil over. Hi, I'm Kelly Case, licensed counselor and marriage coach. I take marriages that are broken and unfulfilling and make them first class so you can love life together. This channel is for people who want a happier home but just don't know how to get it. Be sure to click the subscribe button so that you can be notified whenever I upload anything new. Sean and Kim found out that their tax refund was going to be much larger than they expected. As they began to discuss what they were going to do with the money, it became apparent that they had very different ideas about how it should be used. Kim wanted to use it to take the kids on a vacation. The kids were 8 and 11, and they had never seen the ocean. She saw this as an opportunity to finally do something that she'd been dreaming of doing for a long time. Sean wanted to put it in savings so they wouldn't have to keep using the credit card every time an appliance broke down or the car needed a repair. He saw this as an opportunity to finally have that financial cushion that they'd never had. Sean shared his thoughts. Kim shared hers. 15 minutes into the conversation, it was clear that they both felt strongly about their ideas. This is a conflict. This is a disagreement. It can stay that way. They stay seated at the kitchen table and they seek to understand each other's point of view, asking questions to find out why the other person feels the way that they do. They could find a way to get on the same page or to compromise. Or they can start getting frustrated with each other and it can escalate this disagreement into a fight. This means that they both begin to feel a lot of emotion, maybe frustration, disrespect, hurt, or anger. We all know the feeling when a conversation goes from a calm conflict to a fight. We can feel that trigger switch inside, right? It usually involves yelling, interrupting, criticism, and painful emotions. It's okay to have a conflict, but in order to resolve conflict, you've got to keep the temperature of it below the boiling point. In other words, you have to continually de-escalate or lower the temperature of the conversation and avoid escalating or raising the temperature of the conversation. Because conflict is never resolved above the boiling point. The goal is to resolve the conflict, so be curious and attempt to understand where the other person is coming from, even if you don't agree. Understanding where someone is coming from does not mean that you agree with them. We've only ever lived inside of our own minds. We've only ever seen the world through our lens. We can empathize with others and their descriptions can help us to see things differently, but still, we only have one view available. The one inside our own head. The goal of resolving conflict is to truly understand and see things from your partner's perspective as much as humanly possible. They aren't you. They don't think like you. They don't feel like you. And they shouldn't. You don't really want them to. They're their own person, and they should be. So accept it and just try to understand it. Okay, I'm going to teach you what I call my conflict resolution recipe. It is the recipe for cooking your conflict in a way that keeps it below the boiling point. Conflict is never resolved above the boiling point. The only ingredients you need are curiosity, a listening ear, and vulnerability. Step 1 in this recipe is to recognize. Recognize that one or both of you are triggered and that a conflict is in progress. And then remind yourself that the goal of conflict is to grow closer, not to find out who's right or who's better. Your spouse is not your opponent. Okay? After you recognize, step 2 is to self-reflect. Okay, so in an ideal world, you'd be like, oh my gosh, we're having a conflict. We need a timeout. And you and your spouse would each head to the sidelines like you're in a boxing ring, and you would talk with your coach or your counselor, someone like me, and they would ask you some questions. Now, the chances that you're actually going to stop in the middle of a conflict, separate, and go talk to separate coaches and counselors and get some advice are slim to none. But what I'm asking you to do is I want you to get in the habit of being your own coach. I want you to run through a list in your head every time you find yourself in a fight. As soon as you recognize that you're fighting, remind yourself that the purpose of conflict is not to be right, but to grow closer together. And then ask yourself 5 questions that can help you better explain yourself to your spouse. Your spouse does the same. And you each listen with an ear that wants to understand and to grow closer. Your goal is not to prove them wrong and prove yourself right. Your goal is to be understood, to understand, to reach an agreement or a compromise. So step 2 is calling that time out and asking yourself the following questions. Number 1, what is the primary emotion that I'm feeling right now? I feel frustrated. I feel hurt. I feel misunderstood. Whatever it is, fill in the blank. I feel blank. The second question, am I feeling this way because I'm tired, hungry, PMSing, stressed about something that's unrelated to this conversation? Or does it really have to do with this conversation? Question 3, what do I want? What am I trying to get out of this conversation? What do I really want to happen? Don't expect your spouse to read your mind. You need to know what you want so that you can ask for it. 4, is this conflict triggering anything from your past? Maybe it's triggering a fear or a hurt from your past that you're bringing into the present. 5, am I being self-protective in some way that is keeping this conflict alive? In other words, is there something that you don't want to admit? Are you being stubborn? Are you trying to control? Do you have a selfish agenda? For example, maybe your refusal to admit that you have a drinking problem is what's keeping this argument going. Maybe you don't want to admit that you suck at managing money or that you're poor with time management. You're afraid of what it would mean if you admitted that your spouse is at least partially right about what they're saying about you. The truth is, most of us really hate being wrong. It doesn't feel good. The other truth is, if you and your spouse can admit when you're wrong, take responsibility for it, and work to do better, you will have the keys to a happier marriage. But as long as you are fighting to be right all the time, you will never achieve your goal. So learn the art of being wrong. Step 3 is to disarm. Disarm your defenses and clothe yourself in vulnerability. You got to get out of the fight or flight mode. Step 4 is to keep it at a simmer. As your conversation progresses, be sure that you keep it at a simmer. We don't want any bubbles, okay? We don't want it above the boiling point. Your goal is to keep it at a simmer. I wish this was as easy as cooking, where you just turn down the knob to a lower temperature and maybe blow on it a little bit and leave it alone. But in a relationship, it takes a little more finesse. There are actually a lot of do's and don'ts that I could give you for keeping your relationship at a simmer. But for the sake of time, I'm just going to share with you 3 do's and 3 don'ts. Do listen with a goal to understand. Ask for a break if things are too heated. Admit to your part and take responsibility for what you've contributed. Don't get off topic or bring up other issues. Stick with the issue that was originally brought up, the one that initially caused the state of conflict that you're in. For instance, let's say that you started out discussing how you're going to spend the tax refund, then that is the only thing that you should discuss. It should not turn into a conflict about some other topic. If you have another issue to discuss, quickly schedule a day and a time to do so, and then get back to the topic at hand. Don't bring others into the fight. This is called ganging up on your spouse. You bring in a gang of other people to back up your viewpoint, other people who aren't actually there. You're speaking for them. For example, during a fight, you say, well, everyone thinks this about you, or even your best friend agrees with me. Don't interrupt. Let your spouse completely finish their thought. If they've been talking for several minutes and they seem to be rambling, you could raise your hand or gently touch their arm and politely ask for a chance to speak. For a full list of do's and don'ts, click the link below and I will give it to you for free. My hope for you is that you'll stop fighting and start communicating. Conflict will arise. When it does, your goal is to resolve it without letting it boil over into a fight that leaves you feeling wounded and disconnected. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share so that more people can see this valuable content.